All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission Conservation Access Pass Public Forum. My name is Carrie Ruhlman. I'm the policy manager for the commission. Before we get started, I'll go ahead and introduce some other staff that will be speaking tonight. We have Darren Barnes, our Land and Water Access Division Chief, Josh Jernigan, our Shooting Range Manager, Nathan Green, Law Enforcement Captain in District 5, and Catherine Jewell, our Lead Social Scientist. You'll also see a link on the slide here. That link is to a survey where you can submit comments or questions throughout the presentation. It's also available on our website. It's bit.ly/CAP-survey2025. So this is the meeting objectives for this evening. The first thing we'll be doing is providing an agency overview of the work that we do and how that's done and how we fund it. Next, we'll explain what is under consideration regarding a conservation access pass. Nothing has been proposed yet by the commission. We are here to collect information and get your feedback on a pass. So we'll explain what we're considering, provide some answers to some frequently asked questions that we've received so far about a pass, and then open the floor to gather your feedback and input about what's being considered. So to get us started, we're going to go way back to 1947 when the commission was created to conserve and sustain the state's fish and wildlife resources through research, scientific management, wise use, and public input. It is our mission to conserve North Carolina's wildlife resources and their habitats and provide programs and opportunities that allow hunters, anglers, boaters, and other outdoor enthusiasts to enjoy wildlife-associated recreation. We have a board of 21 appointed representatives from across the state that function as trustees of North Carolina's wildlife resources and ensure that the agency's programs are developed and administered to conserve those resources. Moving on to the agency and the staff that work for the commission, we have about 700 staff, a little more than 700 staff across the state in 9 districts. Divisions within the agency are separated into essentially 3 program areas. We have our conservation programs, our constituent support programs, and our operations and infrastructure programs. So what I'll point out next is the divisions that kind of do our on-the-ground work statewide. So we'll go through each of these and I'll tell you a little about what the work that they do. First, we've got engineering, and they're responsible for construction, facilities management, and capital improvements. They do all of the planning and managing of all the infrastructure projects that include over 500 water access areas, 12 shooting ranges, over 1,800 miles of roadways and associated structures, and over 100 buildings statewide. Next is our Habitat Conservation Division. This is the group that provides technical guidance and recommendations on species and habitat conservation measures for natural resources that are impacted by North Carolina's growing population. This is also the group that's responsible for the North Carolina Wildlife Action Plan, which is a comprehensive management tool for over 500 species of birds, mammals, reptiles, amphibians, fish, mollusks, and crustaceans of greatest conservation need in the state. Our Inland Fisheries Division has 3 sections: fisheries management, aquatic wildlife diversity, and fish production. And these groups work to manage and enhance and restore freshwater public trust resources throughout the state. They maintain active research and monitoring programs on game and non-game species to inform the development of science-based management. Next is Land and Water Access Division, and this division oversees land acquisition, boating and fishing access, game lands, and forestry. Staff in this division manage and maintain over 250 boating access areas, over 260 public fishing areas, and more than 2 million acres of game lands. Staff coordinate the purchase of land and manage habitat for game and non-game species. Next is our wildlife law enforcement, and they are responsible for public safety, enforcement of regulations, and education and outreach. This division promotes public safety and interacts with the public to educate and enforce all the laws on boating. hunting, fishing, trapping, land use, and wildlife use. Next is wildlife education. This is the group that offers most of our programs and opportunities to the public in the form of classes and events on hunting, fishing, shooting sports, and conservation. This division is also responsible for managing the shooting ranges and the Peckman Fishing Education Center. And finally, we have the Wildlife Management Division. This division is split into 3 sections also. We've got game and fur bearer management, wildlife diversity, and private lands. This is the group of biologists that evaluates and monitors birds, mammals, amphibians, reptiles, and habitats to conserve species, and also advises and assists the public on coexisting with these species. So we do all of that work and more with about $109 million budget every year, a third of which comes from federal grants, mostly in the form of the wildlife and sport fish restoration grants. A little over a third is from agency receipts, and that would include things like vessel registrations, license sales, timber sales, and recurring appropriations. And timber sales. And then the remaining third is from a variety of other sources, including the appropriations and the gas tax on motor boat fuels. So at this time, I'm going to hand it over to Darren, and he'll explain what's under consideration regarding the pass and provide answers to frequently asked questions.
Good evening, everyone. So when talking about access, I wanted to start it off about talking about the kind of public access that the agency has available right now. So when we talk about access, we usually look at this in 3 categories. First is our game lands. The Wildlife Resource Commission manages over 2.1 million acres of game lands across the state. Now, these acres of game land are not all owned by the Wildlife Resource Commission. There are lands that are owned by the Wildlife Resource Commission. There are lands that are owned by the federal government, like the U.S. Forest Service. There's lands that are owned by other state agencies, local government, and even properties that are owned by privately owned businesses and property owners. They all make up this 2.1 million acres. The second category we talk about for access are our shooting ranges. So the Wildlife Resource Commission owns and maintains 6 shooting ranges across the state. And in our third category is our boating access areas. The Wildlife Resource Commission has built and maintains over 250 boating access areas across the state that give access to more than 100 bodies of water. And we'll talk about each of these groups separately for a second. So if we talk about our game lands, as you see, we've broken out that ownership across the different ecoregions of the state, the mountains of Piedmont and the coast. And we've broken a little bit, subdivided it to just show you some of the acreage we're talking about. So the Wildlife Resource Commission, if you look at this chart, owns about 542,205 acres across the state that are lands that the Wildlife Commission owns directly, that are game lands. About 1.262 million acres are made up of U.S. Forest Service lands. And then we also have the remaining 299,217 acres that is a mix of the public lands that we have and then other private entities. So we're talking about the state government, other state government like the North Carolina Forest Service, or private land ownership like Duke Energy when we talk about those acres. Now, the Wildlife Commission does actively seek to acquire land, and these would be lands that are then owned by the Wildlife Resource Commission. And the funding for those land acquisitions is represented here. About 50% of that funding for land acquisitions comes from various federal grants. About 25% come from the State Land and Water Fund, which are money that are appropriated by the General Assembly to put aside for buying land for conservation. About 8% comes from Wildlife Commission receipts, which would include license sales, And about 16% come from private donors, which would be the various land trusts that we work with to acquire land. A little more about the Game Lands program specifically in our land management activities. So annually, we spend, like this last budget year, we spent about, or have budgeted about $16 million to maintain those 2.1 million acres across the state. So even though those lands are in different ownerships, the Wildlife Resource Commission does the management of those resources. And we're talking about management of habitats. We're talking about management of species, both game and non-game. So we may be managing for deer, bear, turkeys, but we're also managing for red-cockaded woodpeckers, gopher frogs, turtles, snakes, all the different species that would utilize those particular types of habitat. And if we look at where those funds come from on this graph here, about 75% of those funds come from wildlife restoration funds. So these funds are basically excise tax that are out there on things like firearms, ammunition, and other hunting equipment that the companies that produce those pay as an excess tax and is then returned to the states. So about 75% of that funding comes from those wildlife restoration funds, and about 2%, about 25% come from our agency funds. So it's like a 3-to-1 match. And so these are the funds where that funding comes from to provide for all those management activities on our game lands. If we switch over to shooting ranges, you see a similar story. We have about 10 ranges across the state that are in our shooting range program. 6 of those are Wildlife Commission ranges. 3 of those are county partnership ranges, and 1 is the Camp Haynes partnership range. And again, the funding for these ranges is similar to game lands, with 75% of those funds coming from Wildlife Sport Fish Restoration Program dollars that are earmarked for hunter education, and 25%, which are state dollars, which come from our license sales. So that's fishing license, hunting license, trapping license, and then some voluntary in-kind contributions. If we look at our boat and access areas, as I said, we have over 250 boat and access areas across the state, and the funding for those is the same as or similar to the previous 2 that I mentioned. We get 75% of that funding comes from wildlife sport fish restoration funds, and then we have about 25% that come from state match. But in this case, the bulk of that is vessel registration on motorized vessels with some licensed dollars. And what we're going to be talking here tonight is mostly about the unregistered vessel use of these boat and access areas, not the registered vessel use. And we'll get into that later. So the question becomes, what is a conservation access pass? Well, again, right now, this is just a concept that we're working on to look into how viable this type of concept will be. But at its core, we're looking at it being some sort of annual permit that would be required to access and use agency infrastructure or property. Right now, we're talking about 70 game lands across the state that total are 540,000 acres of agency property. So this is property, again, that is owned by the North Carolina Wildlife Resource Commission. So we know if this concept of access pass goes forward, then it would be used on those lands. Anything beyond that, we would have to get with the various property owners, whether it be the private lands or other state agencies, to see if this access pass concept could be done on those properties. We already know with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, with the U.S. Forest Service, that they will probably not be participating in the access pass because they're federal lands and they're looked at differently. When we look at shooting ranges, we have 5 shooting ranges across the state that would be involved in this to grant access to. The other shooting ranges I mentioned already have an access fee to utilize those ranges. And if we're talking about the boating access areas, we're talking about access to those boating access areas by registered vessels. What we mean by that would be canoes, kayaks, those types of things that are not registered. So why are we why this access pass? Well, over the recent years, the Wildlife Commission has seen an increase in usage of those game lands and boating access areas. In the case of game lands, we've seen an increase in what we would term unlicensed use, meaning that people are not out there hunting, fishing, or trapping. They're doing other activities that there's currently no license for, and they're using those same game lands, those 2.1 million acres. They're using those game lands for other activities. In the case of boat and access area, as we said, we're seeing an increase in users that are not registered vessels. So again, we're talking about canoes, kayaks, paddle boards, those types of things that are using those boating access areas, but are not currently registered or have to currently be registered, and they're using those resources. And one thing to point out why this is kind of an important thing to say is, or to look at, is because up to this point, individuals who hunt, fish, or trap on our game lands have always had to pay for access or use of those game lands. So historically, there was a game land license privilege that had to be purchased if you wanted to hunt, fish, or trap on game lands. And currently, the hunting, fishing, trapping license that we sell now have that fee incorporated into it as part of the base cost of those hunting, fishing, and trapping licenses. So we have those individuals that are already paying in to access and use game lands, and we have this increase of individuals who are not paying in to use game lands. We see that number of people increasing year after year. We see the same thing with our boating access areas. With the motorized vessels, they have to pay a registration fee, and that registration fee, those dollars go to building more boating access areas and allowing us to maintain the ones we have. We're seeing that increase in non-registered vessels using those same resources, but not contributing financially. So additionally, not only are we seeing that increase, but we recognize that increase of use has an impact on the game land infrastructure, on the habitats that are on those game lands, on the different management activities we have on those game lands. So the more people you put out there, the more activities they're doing, you see a general degradation of those habitats infrastructure, and it can impede management activities. So there is a need for additional funding to address these types of impacts on the land, and also the impacts on the wildlife resources on those properties is needed. And so the concept of this pass is basically that all individuals who are participating, or who are on these game lands that are participating in the Access Pass program, whether it be game lands, shooting ranges, boat and access areas, they would all be contributing to the overall agency operations and conservation activities that are done on these various properties. So everyone would be paying in if you're using the resources. So here's just some examples of some of those, what we would call unlicensed activities, meaning they're not out there with a hunting, fishing, or trapping license. And this is just a few examples of that, and the impact that you can see that they can have, an increased number of people using those resources, and how that can be challenging from a management standpoint. So who would then need this access pass if we go down this concept of an access pass? What we're looking at right now is it would be individuals that are 16 or older that are using a game land that would require the access pass. If they're either using those game lands, using shooting ranges, or BAAs, or boat and access areas, I should say, who do not already have a hunting, fishing, or trapping license, they would then need an access pass. And we have a couple examples here of some of the activities that we see a lot on our various game lands. We include things like camping, hiking, birding, wildlife watching, canoeing, kayaking, biking, horseback riding, geocaching, and walking. And it could include other activities. essentially, if you're using a game land that's potentially participating in the access pass, or you're using a shooting range that's participating in the access pass, or a boating access area, and you don't have a hunting, trapping, fishing license, or a boat registration, you would need an access pass. So specifically with shooting ranges, the ranges that would require a pass are these 5 here: Northampton County, Wood County, Caswell County, Richmond County, and Haywood County ranges. The other ranges that are in our program already require access passes. Already have a fee associated with them. So we would not include them in anything we move forward with an access pass. So how would the access pass work? It would be an annual permit from date of purchase. So if you purchase it, it would last you a year. It would be required for any unlicensed users who are using game lands, shooting ranges that we mentioned, or boating access areas to do the recreational activities they want to do. So if you're biking, hiking, camping, or whatever those may be, you would have to have this access pass. Unless you had a hunting license, fishing license, or trapping license. So you'd have to have one or the other. So if we're talking about boat and access areas, individuals that have a registered boat would not need a pass to use the access area. But if you don't have a registered boat and you're using that access area, you would need an access pass. Now, I will say a boat registration would not allow you to access game lands or access a shooting range. You would have to have an access pass to do either of those activities outside of using your boating access area. And right now, since it's just a concept that we're looking at here, a fee has not been determined. But as we look at this, we're comparing it to the least expensive hunting license and fishing license. And annually, those hunting and fishing licenses are currently around $30. So that's kind of the price point we're looking at. But again, this is just a concept.